I'm very fortunate today because I have a mixed audience of ages, and I'm going to begin with a question. I'm going to ask all of you, and I'll see if I can sample just a few responses, but I want to ask high schoolers, yay Bel Air. I'm going to ask undergraduates, yay honors, and anybody who's unlucky enough to have done graduate school. I want to ask you, what's the hardest reading you've ever been assigned? Okay. Do you have to think about it? Okay. Any response from the high schoolers? What's the hardest reading you've been asked to do? Yep.
Heart of Darkness.
Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad. And what's another one? Okay. And how did your teacher help you through that reading? She didn't. Okay. All right, undergraduates. What's the hardest piece of reading you were ever assigned as an undergraduate? Sophocles, okay. And what did your teacher do to help you through that?
Smile.
Perfect. All right, we're batting really well. Okay, any graduate school recovering types here? Who wants to tell me about the hardest piece of reading they did as a graduate student?
Something by Derrida, probably.
Okay, Jacques Derrida, very good. And what did your teacher do to help you through that?
He did a really good job of distilling the concept to its essence and explaining it in pretty basic terms, actually, which even graduate students needed.
Right. Okay, so it's interesting how, because this was a philosophical text that needed a lot of sentence-by-sentence explication, your particular teacher was able to help break it down and help lead you through that particular kind of reading. The interesting thing is how uneven that is. It doesn't seem that high school students ordinarily get it, or undergraduates ordinarily get it, or graduate students ordinarily get it, except in certain special instances when we know that something is incredibly difficult, right? What I'm talking about today is why is it that people at the most advanced levels of instruction sometimes forget to give that help to people to get through their reading. And the reason why is that they can't remember what it was like to be a student. Okay? I am a teacher, and sometimes a teacher of teachers. One of the things I find myself doing is trying to remember what it was like not to be a teacher, meaning the student I was 25, 30 years ago. I can't even bear to think of it. This is something I think that all teachers struggle with once they've been doing it for a while. And sometimes the best students and the best teachers find it hardest to remember what it was like when they weren't very good at what they did. Okay? This is where we all begin, not knowing something and hoping, desperately hoping, that someone or something will help us learn it or how to do it. Remembering what it was like to be a student, and sometimes not a very good student, if we're talking about me, is important right now because this is the only way I can understand the difficulties my students run into with my assignments. What? You don't understand my question? What? You can't read 800 pages of an 18th century novel all at once? What? What? So I have to take a deep breath. And I have to remember my own moments of deep confusion about most academic work, which was all the time as an undergraduate. This was when I would listen to my professor's talk, and it seemed like magic. At that point in my life, I had no idea how much work it took to produce a scholarly book. Back then, I just knew it took a lot of work to read a scholarly book. So my talk today is called Reading Acts, or Acts of Reading, because one of the things that I somehow learned in graduate school, because I was a late bloomer, and I'm not sure when that happened, is that reading, when done in an academic setting, is done as an intentional act. This was important to me because as an undergraduate, I'd never been asked to read and retain anything beyond a few weeks. It was really a semester-long class, and then poof, it was gone. And I had pretty good recall. But it was in graduate school that I realized that I was supposed to remember everything I'd ever read. And I was supposed to be able to research and write about it and sound intelligent about it as if I'd read it just yesterday. And that was a challenge. I was being held accountable for anything I'd ever read, and I would have to be able to use it to do my research and my writing instantly. And the problem is that as an undergraduate, if I did it in a sloppy kind of way, I could just redo it on the spot, because I never had that much reading. Any of you unlucky enough to know what graduate school is like is that there's no time for rereading, really. You do it once, you have to store whatever it is away, and off you go to the next assignment. So now I had to make every moment of reading count, and I had to do it right the first time and move on as quickly as possible. That's graduate school for years and years at a time. So that was when I started thinking seriously about precisely how I was reading, how I would take notes, how I would organize my notes, and how I would store it for use later in my writing and research. And that was the moment that my reading really became intentional and active and strategic. I developed a process around my reading, and I began to realize that I read some things differently than other things at different rates and for different purposes. All this goes into the category of adult life that we could call things I'd wish I knew before. We've been hearing quite a lot about that today, interestingly enough. That's called learning. Learning equals regret. But it took me a long time and a lot of muddling for me to develop an active sense of reading, and I'm offering you now a few approaches that I've developed over too many years to see how you can begin to become more active and strategic and intentional about how you learn. Because the reading is the biggest bottleneck to taking in more material than you have before in your life. So, number one, ask yourself, why am I reading this? What is this assignment for? What am I trying to get from this reading? How might I use it later? This is where the type of material you were assigned is important, as is the context created by your class in the particular assignment. Is this a literary reading of a novel? Is it a chapter in a history textbook? Whatever the material, the goal is to record the key features and key terms as you go along so you can go back to your notes and annotations and build on those later. Number two, once you know the purpose of your reading, you can consciously choose a mode of reading suited to it. Skimming, for example, gets a bad name. Who wants to go to college to learn how to skim? You spend almost all your time in college skimming, and even more time as a graduate student skimming, because you need to learn how to extract something from those texts as quickly as you can. And here I'm going to recommend a blog post by the wonderful historian Tim Burke called How to Read in College, and Google it, and you'll find it. And he makes a great case for thoughtful, strategic skimming as the only way to make your way through all of your assigned readings. Skimming is about the extraction of key terms, arguments, and critical background in anything you read on the fly. It's the kind of reading you do when you need to identify and pull out a particular section of a historical account, say, to talk about something else. So if you're writing a research essay about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, you want to take a look at some books, and you begin looking at things like the Gothic, the French Revolution, the Byron Shelley Circle, and so forth. Skimming is how we can decide what interests us about a topic, what the scholarly debates are about, and what kinds of connections others have made in relation to a particular topic. Skimming is the only way to get a sense of that landscape of a topic. The opposite of skimming is what literary scholars call close reading, but we might as well call slow reading. Okay? This is where we wish to move as slowly as necessary through a text, learn its contours, enter its byways, and immerse ourselves in it as if it were a different world. Here I will cite the great essayist Michel de Montaigne in his essay of pedantry. And I'll just ask you, who knows what a pedant is? Okay, I thought so. A pedant is a person who prides himself on useless knowledge. In other words, a college professor. Michel de Montaigne writes, "What good does it do us to have the stomach full of meat if it do not digest, if it be not incorporated with us, if it does not nourish and support us?" So this is the type of reading that we do to try to absorb and digest so that it may nourish and support us. A book or an essay like this is like a meal or a friend we return to for the rest of our lives. The final point I'd like to make is that the confusions we find ourselves in when we read things for the first time, or maybe for the 20th or 30th time, these confusions are the most important part of our reading. That feeling of puzzlement, that feeling of obscurity, that curiosity about what's going on. Do not be ashamed of that moment when you don't know what's happening there. Use it as the way in. That process of investigation, initiated with a simple question of, how is this supposed to work? That is the beginning of further knowledge. And that is the only way that your teacher knows that you need some help getting through a particular passage. So ask the question, no matter how dumb it might sound to you, because I can guarantee you, half the people in the room with you are having the same question, but they're just keeping it to themselves. I'm going to leave the final word to Montaigne from the same essay. We take other men's knowledge and opinions upon trust, which is an idle and superficial learning. We must make it our own. Go look it up. Thank you.